Said you didn't have the opportunity of seeing that particular Senate public hearing with the Senate. Maybe we just should go to that particular report
yes, and
again.
After that I would,
yes, that's so that you can react to all of that. Let's see that again.
Anticipated major revelations as to how federal government agencies managed the 1.5 trillion naira fuel subsidy would no doubt be disappointed. The Minister of Petroleum Resources, Mrs. Diezani Alison Madueke, was evasive as she fielded questions from lawmakers at a probe investigating the management of fuel subsidy.
So we have a combination of factors here that are all pointing in the same direction in terms of a more than usual increase in the daily consumption of petroleum products.
But Senator Bukola Saraki disagreed with the petroleum minister on how the cost of fuel subsidy jumped from 245.96 billion naira to 1.34 trillion naira. Hit with a barrage of questions, the petroleum minister appeared flustered.
Thank you, distinguished Chairman.
You said the increase was also due to increase in exchange rate. The figures submitted from Central Bank's figure also show that that is not true.
Minister of Finance also noted that there are fluctuations every month in the subsidy claims, but the lawmaker did not buy this explanation.
Factored into that estimate was also an expectation that over the years there had been talk of phasing out of subsidy, so we estimated and put in a notional amount for what that subsidy could be. Hence the difference between what you see in the 245.96 billion and the 1.348 trillion.
Don't you think there's a need for you to go back to the approving authority, that's the National Assembly, to come and get the approval to continue with your fluctuations?
Lawmakers then sought to know the reason why the country's refineries could not be made to work optimally to reduce the amount of crude imported and in the process reduce the amount spent on subsidy.
Even when in another 3.3 years or so, the greenfield refineries kick in as well with a further for approximately 450,000 barrels a day, we will still not be completely able to cover the requirements for PMS.
The question of whether fuel subsidy should remain or not was brought up at the probe.
The benefits of the subsidy are garnered more by the middle line operators, and very little is actually felt by the masses at the end of the line.
Lawmakers afterward told Channels Television that they were not entirely satisfied with the answers given by the government officials.
People need to understand that in dealing with the public, there are questions that won't go away. So if you don't answer them today, you will still have to answer them tomorrow.
Both Ministers of Finance and Petroleum are expected to return next week to give more detailed answers to the Senate panel on how the fuel subsidy scheme has been managed. Linda Akigbe, Channels Television News.
Well, Mr. Okoli, you've seen all of that, and I'm quite sure you were impressed with that. By now, you should you have a cheeky smile on your face. Didn't you get the whole explanation?
It's so clear, like I said, it's Mrs. Konjiwal is somebody we all universally respect, but her predicament and that of her colleague is like sometimes I stay in court, watch an otherwise bright lawyer, competent lawyer, saddled with a hopelessly bad case.
Is that what it is?
Yes. I'm not impressed.
Let's get this. Let's put this in context. This hearing was not about the debate on fuel subsidy and whether or not it should go. It was about the management of fuel subsidy, which would embarrass anybody, because over the years, even the government has admitted that it's not been managed properly. In fact, they admit that it's not getting to the masses whom it was meant for. And as such, it is hard to explain, and as such, they want to do away with it.
It is central to the issue. It is the money. When people tell you it's not about the money, don't you believe them? Because it's about the money. What has happened to you see, we've lived there. The only time anybody can say, this fuel subsidy thing has been with us for 2 decades at least. The only time there was any semblance of good management was during the Abacha era. Of course, I know that the Nigerian Labour Congress, everybody, civil society, sniffed. They said, we've had this before. Then I remember the government saying, don't you worry, the savings, when we get the man who will be in charge of all this, you know that, things. Then Buhari came up with his, Buhari was put in charge of these ETF. And you go to some teaching hospitals today, you see the imprint of the ETF. You tell me you take this money out. Fine. Because you want to have succor for some Nigerians in terms of what you call fuel subsidy. In between, some middlemen are now making sure that the whole benefits don't reach. What you do is deal with the symptoms. You see, I will refer to you, for me, what I consider the most authoritative paper on serious issues is Business Day. If you don't mind, I'll give you, part of their take on it.
Before you go into that, I want to get this straight. It seems to me that you're saying that you would not mind the removal of fuel subsidy if certain parameters are put in place. Is that what you're saying?
No, that's not what I'm saying. You see, you have to go back to the fundamentals. For example, in the NBA position, they said, let's have a 7-year time frame. When you put all this in, part of which central to it would be refineries. And when people keep talking about or saying all these things, Ojukwu just died. In Biafra, they were building refineries, not rocket science. The defunct Biafra was refining its own fuel, driving its own army, when you had blockade all over the place. So the problem you have to understand is that this is fundamentally a rentier economy, where even people, officials who know the proper thing to do are in a position to do it, it does not quite favor them because the law and order situation is such that people get away with everything.
You talk about papers now, and Gwando Tune, I just have to take this question now that you're here. He said, government has been placing adverts on why subsidies should be removed on national television. Is the NBA and civil society not thinking of running in its own advert on why it should not be removed? Now he's talking about a proper debate.
Fine, it is an option, but I will tell you, the government is running the advert with money collected from a collective will, the oil. The NBA, we don't get government subvention. It is, we pay dues. We are private practitioners. So I take my money to counter the people who are government postmen, even when the fuel that they are talking when you remove the subsidy, none of them fuels the fleet of cars in their houses. They don't sit down to think about how it's going to happen in other places. So don't
you think when the subsidy is removed, when the subsidy is finally removed, the final will be fueling the cars in their houses?
Sorry?
When the subsidy is finally removed, those cars which they ordinarily don't get to fuel from their pockets will now be fueled from their pockets.
Tell me another story. So, you see, first and foremost, we want to see a fundamental change, paradigm shift in the governance structure. So, if 20 years ago, as they were removing these subsidies, government is paying for the fleet of cars, I don't see how anything is going to change. They haven't told us it will change. All that they told us is that, you remove this, you do infrastructure, you do this, you do this, you do that. Tell me something new. We've had this before.